John has been involved in every major Rudin development over the last 20 years, and he also co-invented Nantum OS, which he's going to share more information about today. He's going to share his thoughts on the future of our industry of real estate and the role of technology in real estate from a top owner's perspective. We're very excited to welcome one of our friends, John Gilbert from Rudin Management. Please.
Thank you. I'm going to do something different, which is really to hopefully ignite a conversation. Ryan asked me to do three things. One, talk about kind of our vision and what we're doing within Rudin Management. Secondly, and this was my idea, which is to express a fantasy that I have and to ask everybody here to participate in that fantasy. And thirdly, I want to talk about ultimately what we see where the industry is going. So this is Gene Bonneberger, who's our Senior Vice President for Rudin, and he's pulling up the original version of our operating system. We got to this place because Con Ed asked us to be the commercial office petri dish for the smart grid demonstration project back in 2007. Gene and I walked into a meeting. We were shown a graph. The graph was basically what was happening to the grid right before the lights went out in 2003. Question was posed to us by Con Edison. If we, Con Edison, knew 45 seconds before the lights went out that something bad was going to happen, if we could have given you, Rudin, 30 of those seconds, would that have been beneficial to you? Gene and I were like the bobblehead, yes, lights go out, elevators stop, people get stuck in elevators. We then spend an enormous amount of time and energy lowering those elevators one by one, utilizing very scarce emergency generating capacity. So if you could have given us that signal, we could have programmed our elevators. They sense that frequency dip in the grid. They go to the nearest floor, open up, everybody gets let out, nobody gets stuck in elevators. Simple concept. We were very excited about it. We walked out of the meeting and we said to ourselves, that's great, but we don't have a catcher's mitt. I couldn't take that signal, I couldn't make it actionable. I couldn't throw it to the proper base if I wanted to. So we then continued to talk, and it was kind of exciting, and Gene said, I've been thinking about this concept of a super SCADA system. And I said, yeah, like an operating system, right? Our iPhones have operating systems. Our laptops have operating systems. Our iPhones have operating systems. Why doesn't this 2 million square foot building have an operating system? Simple, basic question. We then said, you know what? We're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. Somebody else must have already thought about this and probably invented it. Let's go around the world and look for it. They hadn't. So we said, we've got to build it. Now what should this system be and what should this system do? First, it has to be mobile. The engine room has to exist within our engineers' pockets, right? Basic. Two, it had to integrate all the different systems and subsystems that exist within the building so that on a single page, we can see what's going on in that building or in that portfolio of buildings. Basic, right? Three, it had to remember. I wrote an op-ed in 2009 about how we as an industry had to introduce Nikola Tesla, the creator of alternating current, to Robert Metcalfe, the creator of Ethernet, and get them to hug, get them to bond. Well, there's a third piece, and that's the power of memory. Because in each of our buildings, it's Groundhog Day, right? We get up, we open those chillers, we make a prediction in the engineer's mind as to what time, the proper time, those chillers should be turned on and that engine room should be geared up. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, but it's all kind of guesswork. And if we get it right, how do we remember that we got it right the next day or the next day after that and the next day after that? And how do we use data that's all we've already collected from our BMS to ultimately create predictive and prescriptive pathways to show us, bless you, what that proper path is? So it had to use machine learning algorithms. It ultimately had to be intuitive. Bless you again. It had to, we like to say, if we look at a graph, and we don't understand it, get rid of it. Gone, bye-bye. So what you're looking at right now is literally all of those things wrapped into one. This is 345 Park. The blue line is in real time. So it's just after 10:30. So the middle of that graph, that's 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock. We're right up against 10:30. What you're looking at is that line is actually the forecast. That is the machine telling us what the predictive curve, what we think, based upon weather, based upon occupancy, based upon yesterday's consumption patterns, based upon a week ago's consumption patterns, what we think, what the machine thinks today's consumption is going to be. The first thing it does is it measures the thermal inertia of the building and uses inputs from weather to say, okay, we think that this right here, can you scroll up, Gene, to see what time that was today? So call it 6:30, probably 6:45. Optimal time, start up those engines. Optimal time to ramp down those engines. So immediately we shrink our operational day. It's no longer 6 to 6. It's 6:45 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The second thing it does is what we've been able to do, which is to measure occupancy. So, and this is something that Gene and his team saw. They started seeing at 4 o'clock, why the heck is temperature, and this is consumption, but temperature is very much the same. Why the heck is temperature dropping at 4 o'clock every day in the afternoon, fan speed constant, chilled water constant? What's the variable here? Anyone want to guess?
People starting to leave.
Very good. People leaving the building. We, in effect, each one of us is at least a 100-watt light bulb in terms of the heat that we give off. So as we began to measure occupancy, and we suddenly saw a direct proportion between temperature and occupancy in the building. And if you can go back, Gene, to the predictive curve. So what we then said, well, what are other times that people actually leave the building? Lunchtime, right? So we've actually automated, and it's about to start, so hopefully if I'm as long-winded as I usually am, we'll be able to see that curve drop. Building senses a 2% drop in occupancy, begins to modulate fan speed, and electric consumption drops. So if we can go to the peak of our predictive peak, and it's a little bit, the screen is a little bit different size here. Roughly, generally this is anywhere from 700, so that's 5.9 megawatts predicted as the peak of the morning to the low 900 kilowatt hours, almost a megawatt of power that we save in the middle of the day. A typical building's curve, so if you measure this volumetric space, that's what we're saving.
What is the megawatt plus? Or what is the savings?
The savings for this over the course of a year is probably about $400,000 for this building.
Across our portfolio,
Just for that piece, just for that modulation.
it's about 40 to 50 cents just for that piece. So total, everything that we're doing here is close to 50, 60 cents a foot across our portfolio, which for our 10 million square foot commercial office portfolio is $5 million. Now, what the other thing it does is it's now suddenly, all these technologies, and I want to talk about that in the future of what we see, but suddenly, take battery storage, thermal storage, for instance. Put in batteries in your basement, use electricity when it's cheap at night, you charge them up, you use that electricity during the day when it's expensive. If that curve is that bell shape, batteries, I wouldn't say they're useless, but they're pretty darn close to useless. They are not economical, let me say it nicely. But now suddenly, bell shape converted to double humped camel, turn the battery on here, shut it off, turn the battery on here, now suddenly I've totally reshaped those peaks. So it enables technologies that never worked before. Yeah, Woody?
Why you're not using batteries for more of the curve?
They're too big.
The curve is too big? Or
No, the batteries are so large
Right.
that we don't have the space to ultimately utilize those. And that's why when you have that typical bell-shaped curve, it's too big a peak to shave. You can't sustain that level of load on those batteries for long enough to make them economical. Yes,
That's with traditional lead acid battery.
that's correct.
What about Tesla's power packs?
Looking at those, clearly, to me, the physics of batteries are, it's like the movie The Graduate, right? When Mr. Robinson said, when Dustin Hoffman said, what should I do? And he said, plastics. To me, I would say sensors. That's why I asked Marshall that question about sensors and batteries. Because the physics of those devices are changing, and that's what I want to get into when I talk about our fantasy.
There's also thermal salt. There's like other ways of storing.
There are. None of them work unless you have an operating system that gives you immediate feedback and that allows you to ultimately in real time measure and manage all these things that we need to measure and manage. So at the end of the day, what we said to ourselves, again, it goes back to that catcher's mitt, right? How do I catch that signal? How do I make it actionable? And you can't do it without an operating system. So with Gene's team, many of them are here, they went out and created this device. Now what we've done is we've taken them. This is DBOS, this Digital Building Operating System. It's been rebuilt and rebranded as Nantum OS. Nantum is a word derived from an Algonquin Indian word that means blessing or prayer. And we picked that because we think that this product is a blessing because it will answer many of the prayers that property owners have today and solve many of the problems. I think what's interesting, to go back to what Marshall was focused on in his product, and let me full disclosure, I think it's okay to say this, Marshall, that we are investors in Marshall's company, Radiator Labs. Now, why did we do that? And this kind of segues into my fantasy, which is, let me state my fantasy and then I'll back in as to why I'm talking about it. My fantasy is that we in this room and we collectively have it as an industry have the ability and the wherewithal and the incentive to create and to identify all the best practices that either exist today or create the solutions to those problems for tomorrow if they don't exist today. And I think that should be done through the real estate board. And I think collectively we bring those minds together and we begin to identify what are the problems that we have not been able to solve, like dumb pre-war radiator closed system apartment buildings and office buildings for that matter. How do we create thermostatic control within those spaces that then allows us to save money, measure and manage those scarce resources? Radiator Labs does that. Solves a problem that we have not been able to solve ourselves. Why shouldn't we as an industry ultimately come together, identify the 5, the 10, the 20 problems that all of us have collectively, right? And we all compete, but we compete friendly. I mean, yeah, there's some people that, you know, if they beat us for a deal, I'm not really happy, but you know, a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, you know, forgiveness is important in life, right? But as an industry, as New Yorkers, we should be sitting down and identifying, sketching out, creating the best practices for how buildings should be run the most efficiently, the most productively, and then make investments in those companies that we think have the best product out there on the market. Yeah. Double down and hedge. That's what we do, right? That's how we finance things. That's how we you know, if we're buying a building, why don't we look at the building right next door? Buy a stock, it goes down, you double down, you average out your investment. Great art collectors, the smartest ones go out and they like one artist, they buy everything that artist has. Peter Brandt's a perfect example. And then he slowly sells them and creates a market. This is the reverse of that. I'm not talking about anything illegal here. I'm talking about we all are focused, we're all inundated with companies knocking on our doors saying, I can do this, and I can do that, and I can do this, and I can do that. And we're all individually vetting and analyzing these companies. You add up all of that time, and if you could bring that to a centralized point where a single place is vetting it, and 5 or 6 people in the industry are saying, peppering these folks and saying, this is what I want, this is what I need, MetaProp's a perfect example. Identifying what that built environment should be, and what's the technology ultimately in that built environment that will give me the data that we want. The most valuable thing about Nantum OS is something that doesn't even exist right now. The most valuable thing is the data, the collective data exhaust as more and more buildings have this system. And people come to us that are looking at the system and said, well, who owns my data? You own your data. I said, well, how do I monetize that data? I said, well, if you want to monetize it yourself, it's worth this much. If you want to monetize it collectively, it's worth this much. So let's create a co-op. And if that data exhaust can be monetized, you'll get a check. And let's be smart. Let's take a piece off the top and donate that to some charity. Let's be smart with this. Let's understand the value of this. Because today, if you think you're in the real estate business, think again. Each of us, whether you're on the brokerage side, whether you're on the ownership side, whether you're on the management side, you are in the technology business. What do we manage? We manage information. Woody, I'm sure, will stand up here and say, view the space, high tower, all these different technologies that are utilized by the brokerage community today, by the management, by the leasing community, the sales, on the sales side. Huge technologies. It's all about managing information. Measuring carbon. Look at how interesting how as we turn the corner, less and less people are exhaling. There's less carbon dioxide on those floors and in the building. Each of these sensors represents a quadrant of a floor at 345 Park. So as occupancy begins to go down, CO2 levels go down. It's fascinating. Unless you have the ability to, and it used to be, take the data and express it. Now it's collect, remember, learn, express, and share. You put that right next to buy a piece of dirt, dig a hole, pour a foundation, set steel and glass, rent it up, manage it. Those two parallel tracks are the business that we're in today. So my fantasy is that I would want the real estate board to create a group, and it has to be a big group, I think, probably small at the top, but as we look at different industries, I was just shown a product that I'm really fascinated about. It's a product that you wash your windows with. It has titanium oxide, and the titanium oxide on your windows, this is allegedly, we have to test it, basically purifies the air within the indoor space because it's breaking down the organic and inorganic compounds by utilizing the titanium oxide that is left as a residue on your glass. Brilliant. I hope they're right. So that's the type of product that we could take and bring to our industry, test it out, and take it to the market. Radiator Labs is another example. How many times have you walked down the streets of New York in the middle of winter and you looked up at an apartment building and the windows are wide open? And you know on the other side of that building, people are freezing their butts off. Well now, and why is that? Because they don't have thermostatic control. We were never able to give them. The buildings weren't built to give that tenant thermostatic control. Now they can have it. Problem, solution. So what you're looking at right now, this is so what we found fascinating, and we've been dubbed as one of the critics, and I wouldn't call us a critic of LEED, but I guess we're a critic of LEED. And the reason we're not critical because it's a bad thing, we're critical because so much has been put, I am a LEED platinum building. And then the city comes out with its benchmarking data and says, the biggest LEED platinum buildings have the lowest Energy Star ratings in the city of New York, i.e., that LEED platinum somehow relates to efficiency. It doesn't. Right now, 40% of a building's consumption is core. 60% is tenant. When you design a building to LEED platinum, all you're focused on is the core. You have nothing to do with what the tenant, the 60% of the problem that's in the building. This is a perfect example. Same tenant, same size floor, 2 different floors. This floor built 8 years ago, 10 years ago. This one built about a year ago. The peak load of the new floor is equal, and this is electrical consumption, peak load is almost equal to the base load of the old floor. That means everything here, and this is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, everything here is waste, all things being equal. Well, wow. I mean, that doesn't tell you something, that technology can help you solve a problem. Now again, this is tenant money. Our focus with Nantum OS is to give our corporate tenants a mini Nantum, their own space with the same metrics so that they can begin to understand their peak loads and their base loads. And then introduce them to products like Cisco EnergyWise, which is a digital kill switch, which basically any device within a tenant space or an owner space that has an IP address, you can program it to be shut off on a timer whenever you want and turn back on, which means you wipe out your base load. We cut our base load before we moved out of 345 Park to rebuild the space by about 40%. 40%. Now, you may be asking, you save energy in a commercial office building, that savings goes to the tenant. True, they pay operating, but we all want to be more efficient. We view this product as a tenant retention product, as the ability not only to drive operating costs down, but ultimately as we renegotiate leases, and our game, as you know, if you're in the commercial business, the game is always about retaining those tenants, because the amount of capital you have to spend to re-tenant that space is huge. So what the system has done for us in our commercial office, it's decreased our hot and cold calls by 40%. It's allowed us truly to recommission on a 365, 24/7 basis. We get immediate feedback if there's temperature out of whack, which to Marshall's point earlier must mean fan is out, you know, something wrong within that subsystem. So today we've got 15 developers. Ria is here from Prescriptive Data. We've created a new company called Prescriptive Data. And we did that because the product didn't exist. And we said, this product has to exist. It must exist. Because without it, you can't do half the things we want to do. You can't solve the problems that we all want to solve. You can't give the data to our customers that they're demanding. And as Gene's scaling through, you can see, hit the start time, got interior space temperatures all within the zone that they had to get to, immediate feedback to Gene Hennessy, to Lewis, to Bill Exner, who are here. Immediate feedback, we're doing our job. No alarms going off. Engineers can ultimately go do what they need to do, other things that they need to do because they've got a long list of stuff to get done. So, fantasy. I want to work with owners in New York to create a laundry list of best practices and then go out and either make a decision to invest in these companies or not. And it should be done in New York because the best minds are here in New York. So the question is how can you, now that we can really drive the consumption of electricity down, when the tenant, when that broker representing that tenant come in and saying, I want 8 watts a foot power, and we know they're only going to use 2 or 3, but I want 8. How can we convince them? Well, when we're redesigning our space at 345 Park, and I told the lighting designers, guess what? You have half a watt a foot for lighting. They're like, what? I said, you got half a watt a foot for lighting. That's it. They said, we can't do that. I said, go try. They came and they almost hit, they had 0.6 of a watt per foot for lighting.
Using what type?
LED. So we have not seen that yet. And the problem, obviously, is this is a product to address the issue of retrofitting existing buildings. So that power is already stranded in there. So in new construction, we're starting to see that happen. And it's about time. And I think it's really educating the brokerage community and the tenant community that this is okay. It's not, you don't need to fight for that 8 watts a foot that you're never going to use. And let's figure out, to me, it's part of my fantasy as to what is the right ask. I mean, another interesting metric, we just had an independent analysis of what this system and other improvements that Gene and his team have made within 2 of our buildings, 345 Park and 560 Lex right next door. And when you subtract off the tenant side, the tenant meter, 48% savings. So to your premise, can you cut the capacity of what that building was originally built for by 25%, by 30? I'm not going to take it the full 48% because you do want to future-proof it, but clearly there should be. We have to demonstrate it, but that's, to me, that's the fantasy of the future. If we really can sit and really get our arms around these issues, test them out within the laboratories that all of us own and operate, we can answer that question. You can go across the top, obviously temperature, BMS, EMS is tenant meters, fire safety, elevators, access control is occupancy, and then TPO is the brain, that's the machine learning algorithm. Nantum OS has been rebuilt. I call it the 5 elements. If anybody's into Chinese science, the Chinese have identified 5 elements. It's air, water, fire, wind. What's the other one? Earth. Yeah, thank you. Nantum OS has been designed very similarly, which is electricity, steam, temperature. What are those items rather than system? It's truly understanding electricity, it's understanding temperature, it's understanding water, it's understanding carbon. So we really go right to that commodity rather than system. And then off of that commodity, it feeds into the individual systems that ultimately give us the metrics back into that. So that we're very excited about the launch of that. That'll be in June, and we've driven down the price. It's been built modularly, so it's very scalable. We're really excited about that.
What is the cost of it?
We're trying to get to, and again, I'm going to kind of pull a Marshall here and say every building's a little bit different, but our goal is to get it around 10 cents a foot. So for a 1 million square foot building, that would be $100,000 a year.
Per year?
Per year.
Renting the use of it. You're not-
It's a software as a service. We think on that 1 million square foot building, the payback should be anywhere from 3 to 4 months. Yes.
So when I look at this, and I'm looking at it from a management perspective and on the residential side, to me, what I'm trying to solve is the same problem that we solve in IT, which is this concept of remote monitoring and management, where you've got sensors that are monitoring systems, and then that predictive technology can tell you, look at this particular piece of data. It's telling us that we've got a failure that's imminent.
Bingo.
And then you can prevent that failure rather than doing the expensive repair later on. Is this going in that direction? Does this have the ability to
Right
do
on the
that for you?
right on the money. Why don't you go back to the portfolio view, Gene? So here you have exactly that. So this is our portfolio, and everything you're seeing is real time. This is not a canned presentation. So you have on the y-axis all of our properties. So you substitute your addresses for our addresses. This is roughly 8 million, 9 million square feet of office space. And then across the x-axis, you have temperature, EMS, BMS. So you would have, in the residential, you'd have temperature, you'd have occupancy, you'd have water, you'd have natural gas or oil or both if you've got a dual fuel system. And then you'd have your predictive analytics. So, and then if there was a red on temperature, you just click on temperature and you're immediately drilling down into that. For us, it would be 211 East 70th Street is one of our residential buildings. Okay, what's going on in temperature? Where's that sensor that's red? And then immediately either dispatch somebody if there's not somebody at the building, or be able to solve it locally or remotely as you're monitoring it. But yes, we've actually got people coming to us and saying, you're going to be focused on larger buildings. We want to create a network operating center for smaller buildings. Let us white label your product, and we can then sell that to smaller building owners. And it's an interesting idea. So yeah, that's exactly where we're getting to. Because, for Gene and his team, I love his intuition. I like to say that this product really is a Vulcan mind meld for all you Trekkies out there, of Gene and his team's collective brain and putting that into a server. Because the memory, the institutional memory that Gene has, how many years have you been with Rudin, Gene?
39.
So you got 39 years of experience. Gene Hennessy, how many years have you been with Rudin? 36. Bill Exner?
34.
Okay, so that's 70 plus 40, that's 110 years of expertise in 3 gentlemen.
We're all young guys.
Yeah. And we like to say, we're bringing sexy back to building operations because, we used to think that our buildings were solely run based on physics and chemistry, and they still are. But at the end of the day, now suddenly biology and sociology, I hated sociology. It drove me crazy. Who cares about, standard deviations? But now suddenly it's real because we're following human patterns in our buildings. We're understanding what human beings are actually doing and where they're going and what they're doing. And then how do we deliver that service that we're being paid to deliver as efficiently as we possibly can to them where they are. That's exciting to me. the first thing you have to do is you got to go and assess the building. The second thing you have to do is, in that assessment, you have to identify, okay, where's the brain of the elevator? Where's the BMS? Where's, where the meters, obviously, they're in the basement or in the middle of the building, wherever they are. And then you have to link, you've got to bring those all to a central point. That can be easy or hard, right? Once you do that, it's really, what Rhea and the team has done is to create an amazing gateway that has all the languages that allow each of those devices to communicate with each other, and the Nantum OS software built all into that gateway. That gets put on a wall, and that's the brain. The beauty of that, now suddenly you have that brain, and this is where my fantasy begins to evolve, because somebody may come up with an application that is a really great application that we didn't think about. Well, guess what? That can plug in right over here. And unlike the apps that we have on our iPhone or our iPad, where Spotify doesn't care about Uber, doesn't care about Lyft, doesn't care about Pandora, these apps all add to the collective wisdom and the collective computing capacity of that brain and that gateway that sits. Security. Let me talk about security for a second. Our team has really spent a lot of time focused on security. Everything within that gateway is encrypted. And when it leaves the building, it's encrypted. And when it goes to the cloud and comes back, it's encrypted. So if there's going to be a data breach, it has to be protected at the building with a firewall surrounding that gateway. But the data will be encrypted. Any other questions? Anybody want to be part of this fantasy of mine?
I like it.
I think we can do it, and I think everybody is being, is A, struggling with the same problems, B, inundated by the same calls from all the different companies, and C, wanting to get to a place where the problems can become solutions in a real way. So I'm putting it on Ryan to put that together. So thank you all very much, and happy hunting.